Now, if you've done much research into note-taking methods, you've probably encountered the Zettelkasten method. Unfortunately, in my experience, most sources tend to overcomplicate how to apply this method. And I think that's largely because of the age it was invented in. It's actually much easier to apply now that we have digital note-taking tools. So let's kind of dive into what the method is, what it works well for, and more importantly, how we can easily apply it to our own notes. So to start off with, this method was invented by Niklas Luhmann in the 1950s. So long time before digital note-taking apps came out. He developed it using note cards, which again is part of the reason that I think it tends to be a little bit overcomplicated. Note cards require quite hands-on indexing. But the method was designed to maximize productivity and creativity by mimicking the way our brain works, by creating and connecting ideas together. So it's had a bit of a resurgence recently because, as you might be able to already tell, using backlinking works incredibly well for this method. It hinges on the principle of interconnecting notes together. So networks note-taking, where each note represents an idea or concept and is then linked to other similar concepts or related ones in meaningful ways. And like I mentioned, it was developed for note cards. So a lot of the method kind of looked like this graphic here, where you might have a note card about a concept, one about a different one, and then you can go back and add additional information or ideas or thoughts connected to the original. And you keep going like that, so on and so forth, until eventually you have a web or network of notes. And again, kind of like this visual represents, that used to be done in note cards, but now can be done digitally. So let's talk about how to apply it within our own notes here. So the first thing that you're going to need to do is make sure you're using a note-taking app that allows backlinking. And fortunately, a lot now are. So Reflect, where I am currently, allows backlinking. Ones like Obsidian do, and even Apple Notes is starting to integrate it. So backlinking is catching on, largely thanks to the Zettelkasten method. Now, once you've kind of got yourself set up in a note-taking app like this, you're going to create a new note every time you encounter an interesting idea. And actually, it doesn't just have to be an idea. It could be a thought. It could be a connection. It could be really anything. It's kind of hard to create too many notes with modern digital note-taking tools. So err on recording everything. And the note should be self-contained and understandable on its own. So it shouldn't need context from other notes where you have to go click into another note to figure out what's happening. It should all be within that one self-contained note. And it's also going to need a unique identifier, which again, back in the 50s when this method was invented, they used, I guess, more of a numerical identifier system with decimal points, and the number didn't really relate to the note at all, except that it was the unique identifier. Now we can just use unique names. And a lot of apps like Reflect here will actually merge your notes if they have the exact same title. And that's a benefit because you don't then start linking together all these duplicates. It all lives in one place. But that does mean that you're going to need to give your notes unique titles. So like this one, you can see applying the Zettelkasten method to your notes. I don't have anything else that is called that. So that is the unique identifier for this note, and I can link to it wherever I want. All right, now linking relevant notes together. So this is something that becomes much easier if you apply a simple rule, and that is just to backlink all entities. And so the entities might be people, places, things, projects, all that good stuff. And if I were maybe, taking notes in my daily note, then I can actually just run through an example there. So I've already got my to-do list up here, but I'll pretend I'm writing it underneath here. So let me add one that says record demo video and then I can just link to the new note. So I can just type in Zettelkasten, and now it's linked. And that means when I go into this note that I was, here on the bottom, I can see that I have linked to it on my daily note from Monday, June 12th. And that's sort of how the networking happens automatically. We no longer need to connect things through note cards and handwriting. It happens for us automatically. So again, general rule of thumb, backlink all entities. And if you do that, then you don't really have to stress too much about linking relevant things together because they'll happen again quite naturally. All right, now going to tags. That is a great way of categorizing them. So I like to categorize them using tags relating to the things that I want collections of. So in Reflect here, there's a couple pre-built for me. If I go to books, I see all of the books that I've imported from my Kindle in all of my notes. And if I just go into this book on Genghis Khan, you see it has a tag book. And if I click on that tag, I again come back to this list of books. There's also one for links saved from the internet, people like a personal CRM. And then I've got these custom ones. So my favorite example that I always like to use is recipes. And I like this example because if I just put a tag recipe under any note that is a recipe, what I end up with here is essentially just a personal cookbook of everything that I've successfully made and that I enjoyed. And, you could have stuff for DIY projects, or you could have one for, I don't know, I have one for Reflect because that is the main work that I do. So I kind of mark everything with that. So anyway, you could do whatever tags you want. If you are wanting to really kind of strictly follow the traditional Zettelkasten method, let me go back to my note here. You can always use the tags fleeting note and permanent note. And I spelled permanent note wrong, so I'll have to go back and fix that tag. But you get the idea. Fleeting note and permanent note, that is two tags where you can kind of help you resurface. And that comes into play with the next point where you want to regularly review and update these notes. So things like idea lists, priorities you have. You can see on the left here, I have notes tagged for a mind dump that I do regularly each day. Actually, I review all my Reflect notes very often. Startup Cookie, it's a marketing agency that I help run. So I have dedicated notes that I review for these. But if you wanted to, you could put these notes in it where if something's fleeting, then you can revisit it and know whether to kind of keep it or whether to move it to the trash. And a permanent note, good to review and just kind of check in to make sure it doesn't need to be updated. All right. And then lastly, I kind of already touched on this, but I enjoy pinning high level notes. And this isn't traditionally part of the Zettelkasten method, but I think this is something that comes into play with digital note-taking apps. And if you just have several main categories, maybe with your professional work, your personal life, maybe you have a finance one, you can pin whatever you want over here to be able to access it. All right. So just a couple final thoughts. One thing that keeps a lot of people out of the Zettelkasten method is that it feels very rigorous. And I have a feeling some of this has to do with the name. It sounds very intense, but really it's quite a flexible system and it can be adapted to suit your needs however you'd like. So it's more about the principle of linking and connecting notes together. And again, that's how our brain works. Our memory works by forming associations between thoughts and ideas, and it uses those associations to form new thoughts and ideas. So the Zettelkasten method is more about creating those links and associations so that A, you can store them for later, and B, you can create more associations based off of those. So feel free to experiment and find whatever works best for you. And lastly, I have talked about this a lot, but I really want to emphasize it because I think this is what makes the method easy. You can really, really easily apply this method within your notes without almost any effort by just focusing on two things. Backlinking all entities, so people, places, things, projects, etc., and using tags to categorize your notes. And that will give you this map here. I can show you mine after a while where you can see all of the notes interconnected together. And you get this beautiful kind of visual representation of your brain and your mind map. And then again, if you use the categories, you can go to all of these links and you have these lists pre-organized and ready to go. And this all will just make your note-taking, again, happen quite naturally. You'll apply the Zettelkasten method easily and it becomes second nature so that you really don't even have to think about it anymore.